This is my prep from October 17th, 2005, which happened to be Henrik's first career shutout. This is my...
Holy, what is going on here?
It's basically gathering information for the whole week, and then when the game starts on Sunday, you hope you're ready for any situation.
Welcome back to Club 30, everyone.
It is a beautiful spring day in New York City.
It really is. Growing up, Jay, were you a radio guy or a TV guy?
A lot of radio. We didn't have any cable TV at the farm, and we actually still don't. You know, we have like the satellite. But so radio, like TV was hit or miss, whether you got a signal or not with the antennas, the bunny ears. So we listened to a lot of sports radio.
A lot of sports radio.
How about you?
A lot of radio, going to practice and obviously I loved TV, but there was a lot of times they just didn't air certain games, certain sports on TV, so you relied on radio.
Yeah.
We're talking about Kenny Albert, today's guest. So he covers all sports. He travels all the time.
And all in the same week.
All in the same week.
Right. It's wild.
He's so talented.
Yeah.
His voice is made for TV and radio.
Yes.
And he's done Rangers radio now for, almost 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Every fall, you can hear him do football games.
Yeah.
Then he switched to hockey, and then it
Hoops.
might be basketball, yes.
And MLB.
MLB. I mean,
It's crazy. Well,
whoever books his traveling schedule, I want to talk to that person.
no shit. Well, should we bring him in here and figure it all out?
Let's figure it all out. Let's bring in Kenny Albert. He grew up around the greatest voices in sports. He built a legacy of his own. The only broadcaster to call all four major North American pro sports on national television. He has been the soundtrack to unforgettable moments across the NFL, NHL, MLB, and beyond. Whether it's a Game 7, an overtime thriller, or a playoff showdown. His voice brings the action to life. Welcome to Club 30, Kenny Albert.
Yes.
It's great to be with you guys.
Yeah.
Hank, you were a big part of so many of those Game 7s and playoff thrillers throughout my career. So it's an honor to be here with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I know your schedule is crazy.
Yeah.
Every time I put on the TV or I go to Atlanta to work a game, there you are. There's so many different cities. But I want to know, you grew up in a legendary broadcasting family. Was it an obvious choice for you? Or was it, tell us, how did it come about for you to start working in the industry?
I knew at a really young age that this is what I wanted to do. Growing up around it with my father and my two uncles, his brothers, they were all play-by-play broadcasters. They all worked hockey. They all worked basketball, numerous other sports as well. When I was 5 years old, my parents gave me a tape recorder for my birthday. This was back in the early to mid-1970s. And I would set up my bedroom sort of like this. I had the TV on the far side, my bed was in the middle, and I had a microphone and the tape recorder on the desk. And from the age of 5 or 6, I would announce games into this tape recorder. And not only real games that I was watching on television, but I would make up games in my head.
No way.
I had notebooks with the rosters of the Rangers and the Islanders and some of the other teams around the NHL. And I would just make up these games and call them into a tape recorder. And when I was old enough, I would start bringing the recorder to Madison Square Garden or Shea Stadium, for example. This is when I was about 13 or 14. And, to answer your original question, yes, I wanted to do it from a really young age. Had great teachers around me, obviously, and I would get to tag along with my father, sometimes with my uncles, to games at the Garden and elsewhere. I would start keeping the stats for him. And it was just such a great learning experience via osmosis. I would be sitting there listening to some of the top broadcasters in the business from such a young age. And I also did a lot of writing for my school newspaper and the town newspaper growing up on Long Island. I just wanted to be around sports. Hockey was my favorite, although I loved all of them. I really loved all of them, but hockey was definitely a little bit above. I was 12 years old in 1980 when the U.S. Olympic team, the Miracle on Ice team, won in Lake Placid. And I skated as a youngster. I played hockey, and we had a local rink. And I just remember right around that time in 1980, it just became so much more popular. Kids around the New York area who hadn't skated before or hadn't played hockey started around that time. And then I had a real big break. I was 15 years old in high school, and a local cable station just happened to show up at my school to film a girls' basketball game. And the athletic director, who I was friendly with, introduced me to the producer, and they didn't have any announcers. They just had a production van, a couple of cameras. They were planning on just shooting the game with no broadcasters. So I volunteered. They clipped a microphone on my
How old
on my
were you
shirt.
at this time?
15.
15.
And I sat in the second row. I announced the game. All the people around me had no idea what was going on. They thought I was talking to myself. But that producer, Roy Menton, then gave me the opportunity over the next 3 years in high school to broadcast all of these different sports around Long Island, high school sports, some Division III college sports. And I felt like I had a 3-year head start on anybody else my age back then. These days, kids start much younger. There are camps and in high schools and colleges, so many opportunities. But back then, that wasn't really the case. So I would bring my friends along as the color commentator, and we would announce all these games, and it was just unbelievable experience.
Do you remember the feeling? So 15 years old, that's kind of your first gig then. But for years, you've been doing it on your own, watching your dad, obviously, and watching big games. But here you are doing it for the first time. Was it excitement, or do you remember the emotions?
Yeah, it was just so much fun. And I think bringing my friends along was a big part of it. I would study the rosters, and there was no internet back then. There was no information out there. You had to really dig and talk to the coaches and get the pronunciations. I was a stickler. I've always been a stickler for pronunciations, and you want to get everybody's name right because their parents are watching the game, their friends are watching the game. Went on to college at NYU. We had a great Division III basketball program, so my friends and I announced the games there. But I was also involved in some internships and some other work. A friend of mine who I had met through some others in the business offered me an opportunity to fill in on some Islanders pre- and post-game shows on the radio while I was in college, and that led to actually doing play-by-play for 4 games my senior year in college, real NHL games, Islander games, and I was 21 at the time, and
is that the youngest?
That probably has to be one of the youngest.
Yeah.
And just having that experience, I then used that tape from the Islanders Winnipeg game in December 1989. I wound up getting my first full-time job in the American Hockey League with the Baltimore Skipjacks.
Wow.
And spent 2 years there in the minor leagues, riding the bus with the team, 8-10-hour bus trips all over the Northeast. But looking back, I wouldn't trade those 2 years in for anything. Yeah. It was just such unbelievable experience, calling the games, working in the team office, doing any task that they needed at the time. And but calling the 80 games a year for 2 years in Baltimore was a huge part of my development at that time.
Yeah.
But was it when you started, or not started, but you said at 5 years old, you get your first recorder and you're so into it. Was it the passion for sports or actually talking about sports, or a combo of both?
Probably both, and just being around it. I always joked that when my uncles would come over and my father, and they'd all be talking about the various games and players and coaches that they were around, I felt like I was listening to the first all-sports radio station, which didn't exist back then.
Right.
But I would just soak it all in, and I was pretty quiet, so I would just sit there and listen to the stories they were telling. But just that experience, being around them and other broadcasters and just listening. We didn't have cable television when I was growing up. It just wasn't popular in our area, so I was a big radio listener. And I would listen to hockey, basketball, baseball, football on the radio. We had so many teams here in the New York area, so that was a big part of it as well, just listening to the different phrases and how they would call games, how they would describe the games.
For the kind of layman listener, is there a cadence and delivery difference between radio and TV?
Absolutely.
What do you have to think about going into each one of those?
Big difference between radio and television, and hockey's the one sport where I really go back and forth. The other sports I do have been mostly on television,
Yep.
a little bit of radio here and there, but hockey, I started on radio in Baltimore and then went to Washington for 3 years. We had sort of the reverse. You started with the Rangers for about, 15 years, had a brief stint in Washington. I had 3 years in Washington with the Capitals. On the TV side, they had a split television package, so I worked the home games, about 30 games a year, 92 through 95. So now I was doing mostly television and then started to do some of the national TV as well during that time. Fox, I started doing football in 94, and then they acquired the NHL rights in 1995. So for 5 years was working national games on Fox. But then came back to New York after the 3 years in Washington, started doing radio with the Rangers in 95, the 95-96 season. So it's been a lot of radio, 29 years now with the Rangers, but also working the national games on TV, whether it was Fox and then NBC and now TNT for the last 4 years. Radio, you have to be so descriptive. You have to give the score and time a lot more because they can't see it. They're not watching.
Makes
There's
sense.
no graphic. But the description that goes into a radio call, whether the puck's in the near corner, the far corner, the right point, the left point, center ice, along the boards. TV, you don't have to say as much because the viewers can see it. And there's more time for your color analysts to chime in. I've been lucky enough to work with Dave Maloney for the last 20 years on the radio, and you develop a chemistry with your partner. If the puck's sort of in the neutral zone and not much is going on, I'll pause, gives Dave an opportunity to step in and give his thoughts. But if the puck's in the offensive zone and there's a scoring chance, you don't want to miss that if you're the play-by-play announcer. So there's a definite rhythm between you and your partner. But again, on radio, Jay, it's so much description. You have to allow the listener to be able to close their eyes and envision what's going on, where the puck is, where the players are. On TV, it's not nearly as much description. There are positives to both. I really enjoy doing both, but it's a different animal, play-by-play on television versus radio.
Do you find yourself having to kind of quiet yourself down when you move from radio to TV in the same day or same week?
Yeah, I do have to remind myself, don't talk as much if it's TV. On the TNT games, there are usually two analysts, Eddie Olczyk up in the booth with me, Brian Boucher downstairs. So that's even more of a challenge when you have two other partners. Sometimes you feel like you're not as much a part of the game as you are doing radio. When a radio broadcast, when the game ends, you really feel like you were part of it, almost like you played, because you're describing everything. On TV, you definitely pull back a lot, but they're both a lot of fun.
I mean, radio brings me back to my childhood. I remember going to and from practice, listening to games, and there's something very exciting about listening to radio.
There really is.
Because I'm relying on you so much.
People always tell me, wow, you really, radio on hockey is your best sport, but I think your best call. But I think a lot of it is just the pace of the game, the excitement. The puck's in action for the full 60 minutes. So if you're calling the game on radio, it's really fast-paced. And I also get the question about the different sports. Basketball, and I've done mostly television. I work about 15 Knicks games a year. It's similar to hockey in that the ball's in action for the whole game for 48 minutes. But it's slower. There are more whistles. And on TV, you don't have to talk as much as radio. Football is the most rhythmic. It's one play, and then it's 20 or 25 seconds. So I set up the play, 2nd and 5 from the 35-yard line, call the play, quick recap, and then get out of the way to allow the color analyst to describe what happened. And it's the same way for the entire game. It's one play, 20 or 25 seconds. Another play, 20 or 25 seconds. Baseball, to me, has always been the most challenging because there's so much downtime. The ball's only in action for like 8 minutes. If you add it all up over the course of a baseball game, from the time it's pitched, hit, throwing it around, there's a lot of down. Now it's gotten a lot quicker with the pitch clock the last 2 years. There's not as much time, but to me, that's the most challenging of the four. Now I've also I've worked some Olympic sports, track and field in Rio in 2016, volleyball. And water polo, the last two Olympics. Now, those were a little different. We were calling them off the monitor. We didn't travel to the last two Olympics for various reasons. But it's a lot of fun. It's challenging, but a lot of fun to learn some of those new sports that I never really knew a lot about. The water polo was a lot like hockey.
I was just going to say.
There were power plays
Yeah.
throughout the game.
Yeah.
A lot of the terms are similar, so I kind of call that like a hockey game.
Interesting. Hank, did you grow up listening to radio, like hockey on the radio?
It was a lot of radio because we were going to practice a lot. I mean, we had the rink was always at least 30 minutes from where we lived.
Sure.
So almost every other day we're in the car, and you know, I was a huge sports fan, whether it was soccer or hockey, and listening to your favorite team. You know, back to what I said earlier about listening to someone that painting a picture, but also the intensity goes up when there's a big scoring chance. So you're sitting there in the car and just you could see it happening, the excitement, and I always enjoyed, especially if they're good. I mean, the way they can paint that picture and the intensity, you can feel it. So yeah, I listened to a lot of radio growing up. I really did. But Kenny, do you have like a favorite call that you remember they just nailed it in terms of how they made you feel as a viewer or a listener? Do you have one that comes to mind?
One that I've been involved in, or
actually both? One that you've been involved in, but also that you watched or listened to.
I think as far as watching or listening, Al Michaels with the Miracle on Ice. Do you believe in miracles? That's one that I grew up listening to, and probably one of the more famous calls in broadcasting history. In 1994, I was lucky enough. I was a young broadcaster. I was working in Washington at the time, but due to some crazy circumstances, I got the call during the conference final to work for NHL Radio, the national radio broadcast for the Rangers Canucks final.
Oh.
And, just having the opportunity to call that series is an unbelievable memory. But during that playoff run, Howie Rose had the famous Matteau call, Matteau, when the Rangers beat the Devils in Game 7 in double overtime. And then Sam Rosen with the call at the end of the game against Vancouver. This one will last a lifetime. I was working the game on the radio side, so I didn't hear those live. I wasn't at the Matteau game. As far as my own, the one that I get asked about the most, and you're from Toronto,
Yeah.
so you'll remember the Jose Bautista,
The
home
flip.
run and bat flip.
Yeah, sure.
So it's funny. Baseball is the sport that I've probably done the least of the big four. I used to do about 10 or 15 games a year for Fox every summer. Now it's probably in the 5 to 10 range. But I was on that call in 2015, and even though I've done so much more hockey and football and even basketball, that's the one I get asked about all the time. It was such an iconic game in Canada, the Blue Jays Game 5 against Texas in 2015. So that's the one I get asked about all the time. Football, there have been a number of big moments, key moments. The one that stands out was a Giants-Jets game. Victor Cruz scored a 99-yard touchdown on a pass from Eli Manning against the Jets. It was Christmas weekend 2007, and it was the year the Giants would go on to win the first of the two recent Super Bowls. So I think that's one that seems to come up every year right around the anniversary of that game. As far as hockey, so many memories, and you were a part of most of them during Ranger playoff runs during Hank's career. I think your best game ever that I witnessed was Game 7 in Pittsburgh in 2014. The third period, I was there with Dave calling the game, and some of the saves, that still stands out to this day. John Giannone was working with us on the radio side that game. He was doing the TV pre and post game, but he was down by the glass where you were in the third period, and we were so far up in Pittsburgh, and I just remember John describing how incredible some of those saves were in the Game 7 against Pittsburgh. Also, the Game 6 against Montreal in 2014, Dominic Moore scored the only goal.
Right.
The save that you made on Vanek, that one.
You're an encyclopedia.
Yeah,
This is wild. Like, how do you ingest and hold all of this? Has it always come naturally to
It
you?
has. It has. I have a lot of meaningless information stored up here.
That was not meaningless, though. That was great information right there.
Yeah, that was
well, obviously, yeah.
But 35 years there are names and numbers up. I'll be watching a game once in a while, and sometimes I'll see a certain player on the ice, and I'll be thinking of the player that wore that same number, 20 years ago.
Wild.
So, but I do retain a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of studying that goes into it. I don't think the average person realizes how much work goes into a broadcast.
So let's talk about that. I mean, we had Sam Rosen on last season in Club 30, and we talked about this, the preparation that goes into do what you do. It's not like you just
show up and
start watching
we
and
don't just
talking
show
about
up.
it, right? And I've seen you, same with Sam, is with you, morning skates, you're talking to all the players and sometimes coaches, and just you get so much information. Take us through your game day routine.
Yeah, no, that's something I learned at a young age, the preparation, by being around my father, my uncles. I would watch what went into it. And it was a lot different back then. There was no internet. You were relying on actual newspapers, daily newspapers, weekly publications. You couldn't really watch too many other games back then, at least the out-of-town games. You could watch your local teams. So it's changed a lot. When I started, for example, working football for Fox back in 1994, they would send us VHS cassette tapes of both teams' previous game. But we wouldn't get those until Wednesday. They would have to make copies and then send them out. Now you can watch any game on your phone, on your iPad, on the computer, whatever you want. So the preparations become a little easier as far as what is accessible. You can read any article at any time on the computer. Back when I started, I don't know if you guys even remember fax machines.
Sure.
But they would have these rolls of paper that would spit out of this fax machine. That's how they would send us the articles back in the day.
Would you say that's the biggest change since you started? Just
That's
the
a huge-
information and how
The
quick you
information,
can get information.
technology.
Yeah.
Definitely. Again, I'm sounding like my grandparents who used to tell me about not having television, and then when they finally got black and white TV and then color. But I tell my kids, when I was in school, there was no internet, no cell phone. You had to actually look things up in books, and you couldn't go online. But I have a certain system before every game that I use, and Sam and all of the other announcers. Everybody has their own system, and I learned how important the preparation was at a young age. So I have a checklist that I go through before every game, no matter what the sport is. And it includes watching, if I can, sometimes there are 4 or 5 games in a week, so you really have to be organized and with your time. But I'll try to watch both teams' previous game, if I can, no matter what the sport, or at least part of it. A lot of reading, whether it's on the internet, various publications that are sent to us. For a typical hockey game, for a TNT hockey game, so I have the Ducks and Utah Hockey Club this Wednesday. I'll read 7 days worth of articles. I'll go back a week if it's 2 teams that I'm not following on a regular basis. With the Rangers, it's a lot different because you're around the team all the time.
Yeah.
You're following everything. But if it's 2 teams you haven't seen, I'll go back a week and read all the articles, try to watch the previous game. I prepare my own charts and go through statistics, and we'll go to the morning skate on Wednesday out in Utah this week. So we'll talk to some players and talk to the coaches. Had a great chat with John Tortorella yesterday in Philadelphia and Sheldon Keefe. We had the Devils Flyers game, so both coaches gave us some time prior to the game. And you talk to other broadcasters. You're just accumulating information. And I feel like I probably only use 5 to 10% of what I have prepared because you want to let the game dictate. You don't want to just force in information. That's something I learned at an early age. You have all this information. You want to prove that you did the work, but you don't want to force it in. It's there if you need it. For a typical football game, people find this hard to believe. It's probably about 20, 30, 40 hours total throughout the week of preparation.
Wow.
And Monday through Thursday, you're on your own. And I'm also doing hockey at the same time, except September. Monday, I'll start watching the previous games. And you could be doing 2 teams you haven't seen all season. So you really have to catch up. And the fans of those teams know everything about their teams, right? So you have to be more knowledgeable than they are each and every week, no matter what teams you're calling. So I'll start on Monday. I'll start preparing So I brought some samples here to show you guys.
Look at this.
But this is
a folder.
This was a Giants-Colts game this December.
That's the prep, or yeah.
This is my
holy.
What?
Can we get
is going on here?
So this is the Colts offense, Giants defense, and then vice versa on the other side. But
if someone is listening right now, they can't see this. Can you just describe right now what they're?
So basically, at the start of the week, I'll probably have, for those that are watching, I'm holding my hands apart, but I'll probably read 500 pages of articles and go through statistics and information. But by the end of the week, I want everything on this one sheet. So it's basically the player's name, number, height, weight, college, statistics, other information laid out by position. And again, I'm probably only using 5 to 10% of it during the game.
Right.
But you wind up, and I do a lot of it by hand. I'm old school, so you remember things as you write it down. But with football, again, Monday through Thursday, we're on our own. But we're having Zooms with our crew, with the producer, the director, the color analyst, the sideline reporter, the graphics person, text change, throwing ideas around. And then normally on Friday, we'll go to the home team practice, and we'll get to watch and then sit down and talk to some players, talk to some coaches. Same thing when the visiting team gets in on Saturday. Although these days, since COVID with Zoom, we'll do some of that on Zoom and not in person. But it's basically gathering information for the whole week. And then when the game starts on Sunday, you hope you're ready for any situation. For those that are watching and not listening, this is my prep from October 17th, 2005. Which happened to be Henrik's first career shutout.
Wow.
This was a game against the Florida Panthers. Jaromir Jagr scored 2 power play goals. Peter Pruka scored his first NHL goal.
That's incredible.
Do you have any idea who your backup was in this game?
So Weeks was probably hurt.
Weeks was hurt.
Al Montoya?
Chris Holt.
Chris Holt.
Oh, was the backup.
What was your prep work on me? So always
let's see the distillation.
Sweden.
Now,
good hair.
because I missed some of the games due to the other assignments. I wasn't at your first start, which is why I brought the first shutout.
Yeah.
But the prep work here, you were 2-0-1. You were the number 1 star in each of the last 2 games prior to this one, and you stopped 48 of the last 50 shots. So that was the prep work.
And
then I wrote down right when the game ended, last shutout by a Ranger rookie goalie was John Van Beesbroek in 1985. So that was 20 years prior.
Wow.
So the first rookie with a shutout since 85.
So cool. The fact that you could put, so I'm just guessing right now, at home, do you have everything stacked, organized? It's super organized.
I have a huge file cabinet.
Yeah.
So I'm an organized hoarder. I save a lot.
Yeah.
But I have these year by year, and I was able to pull these out pretty quickly with an assist from the great Mike Rappaport from the Rangers Communications Department.
Shout out to Mike.
I texted him last night. I said, do you know offhand when Henrik broke the team record for wins? And he knew the date immediately. So
of course he did.
So I was able to pull it out, and it was March 18th, 2014 against Ottawa, career win number 302.
302.
That was a franchise record. It was an 8-4.
Oh, I remember. That was a crazy game.
8-4 win in Ottawa. Derek Brassard had 3 points, 2 goals and an assist. And then a couple of days later, the franchise record for shutouts, 50 shutouts against New Jersey. Rick Nash and Derek Stepan scored the goals, 2-0 final. Lundqvist, Ranger record, 50 shutouts.
Wow.
And then I was in Torino, Vancouver, and Sochi. In fact, I have a picture with you from Sochi from the practice rink that we took together. This was February 2010. You shut out Finland 3-0.
3-0.
And my notes indicate that you were wearing number 35, not 30. Your career Olympic record going into this game was 6-1.
6-1.
And it was a 3-0 shutout over Finland. And then a couple of games from Sochi, 5-3 win over Latvia. And then the quarterfinal matchup shutout Slovenia, 5-0. Carl Hagelin scored 2.
Look at that, Carl.
Steen,
Shout
a
out to
power
Hags.
play goal.
Eggs.
Steen, Daniel Sedin, Eriksson, Hagelin were the goal scorers.
I mean, you've covered so
So you
many.
need the line combinations from that game.
That's
Wow.
incredible.
Top line was Steen, Berglund, and Landeskog.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
Hank,
this
where
was
are your notes from your
My
broadcast?
notes?
Yeah, just like I'd like to see how you prep. You have a file folder that you could share with the club? Through your
No, I didn't write down much. I didn't. Obviously, you prepped a little bit about tendencies from your opponent, especially on their power play. But when it came to my game, it was more just the same, more of the same. The way I thought about movement or what I need to do to have success.
Yeah.
he left the written preparation to the broadcast.
Sure. Well, now that you're a broadcaster, do you find yourself changing your the way that you prep and get ready for shows, whether it's MSG or with TNT?
Well, now I actually have to read. I didn't have to read much throughout my NHL career, but I don't go back a week, but I try to obviously pay attention to what's going on, watch some highlights. But it's very different. I always say, what Kenny does. I just speak too slow. It would be hard for me to be a play-by-play. Before I'm done talking, there are 2 plays ahead of it. So that's why studio is much better for me than play-by-play.
And the other thing is, from the former athletes, so much of what they're talking about during the broadcast, they're reacting to what they see. They're bringing back anecdotes from their playing careers. So there's probably not nearly as much preparation as there would be for the play-by-play announcer.
But you covered so many different, like Super Bowl, Stanley Cup Finals, Olympic Games. Is the preparation the same, or does it change? Obviously, you talked about football. It's just almost a full week.
Football is definitely the most time-consuming. Hockey, you get into a rhythm.
What about the big moment games, like the Super Bowl or the Cup Finals? Does that change the? Or
I always say that it doesn't as far as the preparation, but I'm sure those games definitely feel different. I had the great fortune to work one Super Bowl. It was the world feed, the international feed, so it was not on in the United States. It was on in the rest of the world, and now several Stanley Cup Finals on radio and 2 on television, another one coming up this year. Some baseball playoff games, football playoff games through the years. I tend to think that I prepare the same way for every game, but you're probably definitely even more focused for some of those big games. You could feel it. Someone asked me the other day in Vegas, a young broadcaster came over to chat, and he asked me if I get nervous before games. I wouldn't really say nervous. Maybe early in my career, yes, but now it's more excitement. I remember game 1 of the final in Vegas 2 years ago. That was the first Stanley Cup final on TNT, and there was definitely an excitement before that opening when we first went on during game 1. But then once the game starts, I think in some of those big games, you definitely mentally you want to make sure you're even more sharp. You try to be sharp all the time, and you never want to miscall a player or a goal. Although in hockey, sometimes deflections are tough. You're not going to get them all right. There are some crazy goals that have been scored through the years, and I remember overtime. It was the Montreal-Tampa Bay final in 2021. I was calling it for NBC, and that was the second COVID year, so the building wasn't totally full. We had to sort of quarantine in Montreal. We could only go to the game or practice. We weren't allowed to go to restaurants or anywhere else. But it was 3-0 Tampa Bay, and they had a power play in overtime. People forget about this. They could have swept Montreal. They had a 4-minute power play, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember thinking to myself before the overtime, just reminding myself to be so mentally sharp because the cup-winning goal could have been scored at any moment. As it turns out, Montreal won that game, and then Tampa Bay wound up winning in Game 5. But you definitely feel more, definitely even more focused for some of those big moments.
So if you had a couple partners throughout your career, you talked about Dave, for example, was it 20 years now?
20 years.
So
20 years.
How much does that help when you worked with someone for a long time? Because I bet just knowing when to talk, when to give your colleague more space, Do you feel more comfortable when you've been working with someone for a long time? Or
It definitely does help when you have that familiarity, when you're close with somebody, close friends as well. I might hold the record. I've had about 250 partners in my career, and I list them all in my book, which I wrote, which came out about a year and a half ago. I have a list in the back of all the partners. But I'm real fortunate. I've really enjoyed working with each and every one of them, and many of them, it's only been for one game, whether it's hockey or some of the other sports. But others, Dave Maloney, 20 years. Some of my football partners, I worked with Darryl Moose Johnston for 10 years, Tony Siragusa, Moose and Goose. That was a great run for 10 years. I worked with Tim Green for 7 years, who's battling ALS. He's got the most positive attitude of anyone I ever met, and his daughter is actually married to Adam Fox. They had a baby last week.
Oh, wow.
And I remember when she was born. I was working with Tim when she was born, and now she's married to a Ranger, ironically. But Tim and I worked together for 7 years. My current football partner, Jonathan Vilma, former New Orleans Saint, we've been together for 5. But it does, when you work with someone on a consistent basis, you have that chemistry, that camaraderie.
Yeah.
So how does it work if you only have one game? Or let's say this is game 1, you and me. We sit down. I assume,
I hope we get to do one day. I'd love for you to join us in the booth.
Yeah, again, I think it's
whether it's
too
with
slow.
MSG, TNT,
Maybe football.
You'd be great.
No, but I
You'd be great.
assume you lead in that conversation. This is how I like it, and then try to just be on the same page in terms
Definitely
of
try to be on the same page. I'll do a little research on the person's career. It's usually someone I'm familiar with, but I might try to lead them into some stories about when they were a player or a coach. Sometimes I could be working with someone who's new, who's never worked a game before. So then I am sort of taking the lead. Other times I could be stepping in. I worked 3 games with Troy Aikman, for example, in 2007, where he was already established as one of the top analysts in the sport. So, it's probably a little different if it's someone who's on his level or if it's someone who's working a game for the first time. If it's one of the sports that I'm not as familiar with, I'll try to lean on them for their expertise. I had some great analysts during the water polo this past summer at the Olympics, and they were former players and Olympians, so I would lean on them a lot. We had Wayne Gretzky with us in the booth for a game, the outdoor game in Hamilton a couple of years ago, so that was a lot of fun. It was more storytelling than analyzing the game.
Yep.
It was Buffalo and Toronto, but with Wayne, he has such unbelievable stories. You've spent a lot of time around him now, so with that one, we were calling the game, but we were also just having a conversation about the sport of hockey.
I mean, I have a crazy stat. In 2009, you covered 4 different sports in 4 days. NFL game, MLB playoff celebration, Rangers game, and Knicks season opener. I mean, okay. How do you prepare for that?
There have been some crazy stretches. There have definitely been some week to 10-day periods where I've had 3 or 4 sports. Now, oftentimes in October, November, December, it's pretty frequent where I'll have 3 different sports in a week. Football on Sunday, hockey during the week with the Rangers or TNT, and then some of the Knicks broadcasts that I do, depending on the schedule. So 3 in a week is not uncommon, and I love it. I love those times. There's such fun times in the year when everything's going on. I just feel like you have to be organized, get ahead with the work and the preparation. I mentioned my checklist earlier that I go through, and I get a lot of work done on planes, in hotel rooms, in airports, in Ubers, and taxis.
You're away from home a long time. How does that work? How have you found how to balance all that?
First of all, I grew up around it. My father he wasn't traveling as much because they didn't do as many away games, but he was doing the Knicks and Rangers radio, but he also did the sports on the 6 and 11 o'clock news on WNBC. So he was never home during the week. My family's great about it. My wife knew what she was getting into when we first met. By the way, crazy story, we would not have met if the Rangers won the Cup in Game 5 in '94. I actually met my wife, so I was working that series for NHL radio, as I mentioned earlier, and she had gone to college with a friend of mine who I met in Baltimore, and he was in town in New York. if the Rangers won the Cup in Game 5, I would have probably stayed for a party at the Garden, some kind of celebration. That's the night we met. So Rangers wind up winning the Cup in Game 7. It all worked out, but
It all worked out.
but she's been unbelievable as far as the schedule. Played the role of two parents pretty often. Our two girls are now 25 and 22, so they're adults. But they were used to it.
Yeah.
I wasn't around a lot on weekends, but we tried to make the most of it. During the week, I felt like I was home a lot more than friends of mine who would be in the office all day.
Yeah.
So if I wasn't on the road with the Rangers, I was home. So I would drive to school, pick up from school, go to various activities. So we sort of it was a reverse schedule
Sure.
of a lot of people, but we made the most of it, and they were great about it.
All right. Do your daughters have any interest in broadcast, or what are they into?
So my older daughter, and Hank's met them both, and he's been so kind to them through the years. You were their favorite, by the way. When your career started, they were 6 and 2.
Oh,
So they grew up watching you play and met
Man,
you
you're
on
old.
a number
Yeah,
of
I'm getting
occasions.
old. I know.
But my older daughter, Amanda, works for the NHL.
Oh, great.
She's a video editor, producer at the NHL office right here in Manhattan. So she's editing hockey highlights all day and loves it. And then our younger one, Sydney, is finishing up college at Wisconsin.
Oh,
So
nice.
she'll be back home pretty soon. But they loved hockey, loved sports, but hockey was their favorite. Loved the Rangers, loved Henrik.
Do you enjoy radio as much as TV?
They're both so much fun. And like I said earlier, there is something about radio. You just feel like you're so into the game while you're calling it. And again, I go back to some of those great playoff series, the Game 7s against Washington and Pittsburgh and Ottawa and Philadelphia. And those are some of the biggest memories, having called those games on the radio. Just the excitement in the Garden. You could feel the passion. The night that you guys advanced to the Cup final, I think that was the loudest that I've heard the Garden that night when the final buzzer went off, the 1-0 win over Montreal. I'm not sure I've heard the Garden louder than it was that night.
That was wild. For a guy who always is looking forward to the next week, with Big Four sports leagues, what was the process like of writing the book and looking backwards? Like, what made you think, like, I'm going to go back in time and I have something to say here?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And to be honest, I had always thought about it, but I never really had the time.
Yeah.
So busy for the most part throughout the year. And then when COVID hit, we all had a lot more time than we were used to. And I think a little before that, I had started putting some words to paper on the computer, put together an outline. I had received an email from a book agent named Andrew Blauner about 5 years before, and we had some mutual connections. And he said, if you're ever thinking about writing a book, let me know. And it turns out he did a great job connecting me with the publisher, Triumph Books, out of Chicago. And most of it was done during that COVID period, 2020, 21. It was due on September 1st, 2022. And I remember them telling me, you have to get us 70,000 words by that date. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I ever going to get 70,000 words?
Right.
At one point, I was at like 25,000, and I didn't think I had any more stories to tell. But got there, and to have Wayne Gretzky and Walt Clyde Frazier write the forwards was just, to see their names on the cover is just surreal. And obviously, I've gotten to know Wayne. Knew him a little bit when he was with the Rangers back 96 through 99. He would always come up. It was a different plane back then. Well, you probably remember the old team plane,
I
right?
do remember,
with the management in the front.
Yep.
And then the broadcasters and trainers would sit in the middle, and then the players were all in the back. So Wayne hated flying. He would always come up and talk to JD. He would spend time with John Davidson to kill the time and not have his mind on the flight and the turbulence. So, but got to know him a lot better, during the last 4 years with TNT, and he was so gracious and taking part in writing one of the forwards, and Clyde Frazier as well, who I get to work about 15 Knicks games with. Have you had Clyde on the
No,
Club
not
Third?
yet. That's a good one.
He would be an unbelievable guest.
He would be
for you
amazing.
guys.
Yes.
But just wanted to get the story. I felt like I had so many stories. I speak to college and high school students every summer.
Yeah.
There are several broadcasting camps around the New York area. And all of these students, they ask great questions and they want to hear the stories. a lot of the similar questions that we've talked about, favorite
Sure.
games, differences between radio and TV, differences between the various sports. So wound up putting an outline together and getting the book, up and running and finished. And, I have a couple of probably my two favorite stories in there, if we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
When I was in Baltimore calling minor league hockey, I was 22 years old when I was hired. And on the road, to save money, they assigned me a roommate, and it was our assistant coach, a fellow by the name of Barry Trotz, who's gone on to an incredible coaching career. Won a Stanley Cup with Washington, long time in Nashville, Islanders, now the general manager in Nashville. He was 26, I was 22. They had us room together. Some other teams, it was the radio guy and the bus driver. For us, it was the radio guy and the assistant coach. So I became pretty close with Barry. And for 2 years, we were road roommates. One day I was interviewing him, taping an interview on the radio, and he said something that came out a little funny. I can't remember what it was, but I didn't use it on the air, but I went and played it for some of the players. And word got back to him, and he said, I'm going to get you back. So sure enough, 4 months later, the one time a year we would fly would be to the maritime provinces, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and then we'd bus throughout to all the games. So we take 3 flights one day. We go from Baltimore to Boston, Boston to Halifax, Halifax to Sydney, Nova Scotia. And we get off the plane on the tarmac, small airport. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's a gentleman with a clipboard. And I come down the stairs, and he points to my name. He says, is this you? You have to come with me. They bring me into this small room and start interrogating me. Is your passport valid? Have you ever been arrested? Do you know anyone that's done anything illegal? Like 20 questions. Then they put me in a car and start driving around and asking similar questions. And it turns out it was all set up by Barry Trotz, the Capitals security guy at the time. His brother was the police chief up there.
That's incredible.
And they would get one person every year, a player, a trainer, me. So it was a fake arrest. Barry still
Were you
loves
sweating a little bit?
a little bit. I knew I didn't do anything, but
You never
You're
know.
thinking
but
they're like,
Barry Trotzy still talks about it. And the other one was I was doing the post-game interviews in the Yankee clubhouse in 2003 when they beat the Red Sox. I was in charge of hosting the post-game celebration on Fox. And I'm interviewing some of the players, Mariano Rivera, a couple of others, Joe Torre. And it's like 1 in the morning. It was the game when Aaron Boone hit the home run in the extra innings. It was like, after midnight when he hits the home run and the Yankees win Game 7. And I'm doing these interviews, and I see out of the corner of my eye Mayor Bloomberg off to the side. And I can sense he wants to be interviewed on television. And my producer says, okay, throw it back up to the booth. We have to sign off. They have to get to the late news. So we're off the air at that point.
yeah.
And this young PR person with the mayor comes over and whispers to me, do you mind having the mayor on next? I said, we're off the air. He says, can you fake it? so I tell the cameraman, make it look like you're filming this. So Mayor Bloomberg comes over, and I do like a 5-minute fake interview, coming up with questions. I knew he was from Boston, and his mom was a Red Sox fan. I asked him about the game, and this interview wasn't even recorded. It never went out on television. So the Barry Trotz fake arrest, the Mayor Bloomberg fake interview. Those are two of my favorite stories in the book. But I also talk about, the differences between calling the different sports, favorite games, Olympics. I talk about my childhood. I was actually 3 months premature. So I was a twin when I was born. And my parents, they didn't know they were having twins. And we were born 3 months early. I had a brother who didn't survive. And then I was in an incubator for 2.5 months.
Wow.
So I was born, I was due May 5th, born February 2nd, and then was in the hospital until early April. So I tell the story about that. Also, I wouldn't be here if not for the New York Mets. So early in the Mets history, they played at a place called the Polo Grounds for 2 years. 1964, they moved into Shea Stadium in Queens. So my father was 23 at the time, 23 years old, and he was hired to do a pregame show on the radio, Mets pregame show. My mother was 19 years old at the time. She was living in Queens. She was a big sports fan. And she went and applied for a job. They were called usherettes. They were female hostesses at the games to show people to their seats. So she gets a job. They wind up meeting at Shea Stadium. He interviewed her on the radio. They brought up some people that worked in the stadium to be interviewed at the first night game ever at Shea Stadium. So they actually met at Shea Stadium during a Mets game in 1964.
Oh, wow. And here we are. It's funny. I was just reflecting, kind of listening to this. This is kind of the best seat in the house. Every episode we get to talk to people, and alongside Hank, who have like one thing in common with our host here, which is that they've had a singular focus and singular success on their career since very, very young. And for normal people like me, we ask ourselves like over and over again, what do I want to be when I grow up? And that answer changes, for us. Right, depending on who we meet, but we've never had a singular focus and a singular track record of success. Have you guys ever had a moment when maybe it was a low moment when you thought like, hockey or being an analyst, this just isn't for me? What else should I do?
I had a couple months. I think I was 18. I think that was the only time I questioned if hockey was the thing. And I made it to the Swedish Elite League. I played a couple games, then they sent me down, and I kind of lost the joy a little bit for a few months. And I remember I was sitting down with my parents and my brother. I was like, I don't know, man, is this it? I deep inside, I knew hockey was the thing, but it was like a big
There's doubt. Yeah.
It was doubt, and like when you lose the joy of it. It's like, why am I doing it? So it was just to rediscover that joy within the game again, and it just became very clear. Like, yeah, of course I want to play hockey, and I'm gonna get back and I get better and do it.
Yeah, but you didn't contemplate, going into HVAC or
no. But it's also, to your point, growing up, when I was 15, 16, 17, even 18, it was always strange to me that some of my friends did not know what to do, to your point, because it was so obvious to me from the age 6, 7, 8 that, I want to play hockey. This is it. So it's strange to have people around you that, I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah.
Even at age 22, maybe.
I know people that are 40 and still ask themselves that. And there's no right or wrong. It's
No.
just, but...
I know. I think you're very fortunate if you find that passion at an early age.
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee.
For sure. And passion's one thing, but execution on that is that's even harder. Everybody's passionate. Like, I want to be a hockey player too, or whatever it was, right? How about you, Kenny?
First of all, it's a great question. I have two quick anecdotes about Hank. So you talked about when you were 18, 19, maybe not being sure. So Brian Boucher, who's one of my partners on TNT, who does a great job, longtime goalie in the NHL, he's always told a story about you during the lockout. He played in Sweden in 2004, I guess.
My last year in Sweden. So I'm 22.
He played a game against you. He said he knew, he was watching you at the other end. He knew at that moment you were going to be a star in the NHL. He tells that story, now over 20 years later from that game you guys played against each other during the lockout.
Wow.
But I remember during your rookie season, and I would come up to a lot of the morning skates, and we did numerous interviews into a tape recorder. Not the one that I had when I was 5 years old. This is an upgraded version. Yeah. And we were sitting at your locker one day, and I remember you saying, this was probably about halfway through the season, you said that when you came to training camp that year with the Rangers, your biggest thought was, where am I going to live in Hartford? You had no,
Maybe I said that to be polite.
Yeah, maybe.
Hartford Hank.
But I distinctly remember you saying that you were wondering, where am I going to live in Hartford? And then, of course, you never wound up in Hartford. The first game I worked with Dave, he had filled in a little bit before that, but his first game as the full-time radio analyst was the first, you didn't play, but it was the first game you dressed for in the regular season, the opener in Philadelphia. And I remember that game so vividly, October 2005, because there weren't a lot of expectations for the team that year.
No, it
right?
wasn't.
And then, Jágr scores the 50 goals. You had an unbelievable season. I think Jason Strudwick scored the first goal.
Did he really?
In that first game. But you guys won that game in Philly. Tom Rennie was the coach, and you wind up making the playoffs. So
it was a fun year.
Can't believe how long ago that was. But Jay, getting back to the question, similar to what Hank said, I always knew that this is what I wanted to do from 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I kind of had the same feeling, as you did, where I knew a lot of other people who maybe didn't know what their focus was or what they wanted to do. I knew that this was always what I wanted to do. And when I was working in Baltimore for those 2 years, again, unbelievable experience, wouldn't trade it in for anything. But there were times when I was wondering, will I ever get to the next level? I was riding the bus with the players who were all the same age as me, the coaches, and we all had the same goal, and that was to get to the NHL, to the National Hockey League. And on that team, we had a lot of guys. Our goalies were Ole Kolzig and Byron Defoe, who both wound up having long NHL careers. Yeah. We had a number of players on that team who went on to excellent NHL careers, but we were all about that same age. And, I remember thinking the NHL was only 21 teams at the time, so there weren't as many opportunities for broadcasters. But that's when expansion started to come into play. And San Jose got a franchise in 91, 92. And one of the broadcasters from the AHL, from New Haven, got the San Jose job. So now I'm thinking, all right, maybe there is an opportunity for American Hockey League broadcasters. And over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, the league expanded to 26, 28, and it did open up a lot of jobs. Now, I was lucky enough. We were in the same practice rink as the Capitals. The Skipjacks were the AHL affiliate, and the players all lived in the same area, same community, and some of the folks from the Capitals and from their broadcast crew had listened and watched, to some of our games. And I was real fortunate to get hired by what was then Home Team Sports in Washington in 1992. Spent the 3 years there. Working with Craig Laughlin, who still does a terrific job on the Capitals games. And best of luck to Craig, just underwent open heart surgery, so he's on the mend. But those 3 years in Washington were great. I thought I'd be there forever, actually.
So you had no plan B, even in that moment where taking the next step wasn't obvious. There was no looking over your shoulder, seeing what your friends from school were doing.
Right. I was 23, 24, calling the games in Baltimore, and then got the opportunity in Washington. But probably was just, kind of thinking about things on a short-term basis then, just looking for the next opportunity. Never in my wildest dreams thought that I would wind up calling all of these different sports, even though I had done in high school for the cable station so many sports. And then when I worked in Washington, did a lot of college basketball, some college lacrosse, soccer, other sports as well. So the variety, continued down there. But the NFL opportunity, so many of us were in the right place at the right time. I was 26 years old. Joe Buck was 25. Kevin Harlan and Tom Brenneman were other young broadcasters. Fox had kind of stolen the rights away to the NFC package from CBS. Yeah. And a lot of us who never thought we would ever work NFL games on network television got the opportunity at such a young age.
Cool.
I want to know, in sports, obviously, you try to get better. You train physically, mentally, a lot of feedback. As a play-by-play announcer, how do you get better? Is there any area you want to improve, and feedback?
Early on in my career, I would watch a lot of the games back, listen. You're always your own worst critic, right? Always would try to critique myself. There's not as much feedback as you would expect. I think once you get the job, no news is good news, I guess. But I'm always watching and listening to other announcers. You might pick up a little thing here and there, whether it's a note that you can use or something about their style, voice inflection. When I was younger, I would listen and write down a lot of the terms, the terminology that a lot of the other broadcasters would use. But you're always trying to improve. I'll listen back to some tapes from 30 or 35 years ago. I can't even believe it's the same person.
What's different?
It's a different. The voice is different.
Voice
it's
is
crazy.
different. Yeah.
I guess the voice develops through the years. There are some clips on YouTube. I don't know if have you ever heard about the Ranger Islander goalie fight in the late 90s? Dan Cloutier and Tommy Salo.
Oh, I remember that.
I was calling that game.
Oh, you were?
On Fox, on TV. So if you can look that up on YouTube.
Yeah.
And the voice just sounds different.
Interesting.
That was around 1998. That was when Dan Cloutier was in goal for the Rangers, and he skated by the Islander bench at Nassau Coliseum, challenged the bench, wound up, killing Tommy Salo and fellow
Tommy,
countryman.
he was the best goalie from Sweden at the
Yeah.
time. So, of course, I
Yeah.
remember. That was big news in Sweden.
So I was on the call.
You were on the
for
call.
that one. But no, you're always trying to improve. But like I said, there's probably not as much feedback from others as you would expect. It's more self-feedback.
Mm-hmm. Coming at it from another angle, is there somebody, a young protege today, who you think, wow, this person's bringing something brand new that I've never seen to the booth or to the game?
There are a lot of good young broadcasters. Hard to really think of one specifically, but I've gotten to meet a lot of them through the years at these camps, and some of those students have gone on to terrific careers as broadcasters. I'm constantly getting emails from young broadcasters asking for advice. I'll listen to their tapes.
Sure.
We just had the Hartford Wolfpack broadcaster sit with us in the booth at a game last week just to listen in and observe and learn.
Cool.
So I hear from a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I enjoy watching
Mentoring.
a lot of mentoring a lot of the young
Yeah.
broadcasters that are out there.
Cool.
How long do you think you'll do it for?
Hopefully for a long time.
For a long
Yeah.
time. I mean, is there anything else? If you did not broadcast, do you know what you would be doing?
I would be a goalie. No, I actually did play a little bit.
Yeah.
Not goalie. Well, maybe goalie in my driveway. Went to NYU, and I thought my hockey career was done. I had played in high school. We had a club team. And another student, my freshman year in 1986, started a hockey team, a hockey club at NYU. And I didn't score a lot of goals, but I scored the first.
You scored
I
the
did score the first. at the old Sky Rink on the 16th floor,
Yeah,
33rd between 9th and 10th.
That was before Chelsea Piers.
Before Chelsea Piers,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay.
If I weren't doing play-by-play, like I said earlier, I did a lot of writing in high school, so maybe I would be a sports writer, but I really don't know what else I would have done. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, no,
because I didn't really have a plan B.
That's great.
Well, we're
But
happy.
no, I'd love to. I love what I do.
Yeah.
My family's great about it. I do have a lot of time off in the summer, so it's not totally year round. They've gotten to come on a lot of trips. They were at the Olympics in Vancouver, Rio. When my kids were young, one of the spring breaks was in Buffalo during a playoff series back in 2007, I guess.
Different type of
Buffalo.
Spring break in Buffalo.
That's sick.
Nothing against Buffalo.
No. Of course
But no, I love what I do. I never feel like I'm working, even though there's a lot of work and preparation that goes into it.
Bless you.
It's so much fun. It's probably. I'm assuming it's like what you felt as an athlete, where you just love what you do. Maybe the grind, the practice every day, the travel, some of that.
Yeah,
bothers you a little bit,
I
but-
think when you embrace it and you enjoy it, I love the grind.
But I'm just
the traveling.
I love the grind,
the practices,
routine and the
routine.
the flow.
the travel. I'm okay with it. I don't mind the long flights because I get a lot of work done.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a while there's a crazy stretch with a red eye or an early morning flight. Not great about the 6 a.m. flights, but I have to do it sometimes. I'm real fortunate. Also working for 3 different networks, the jigsaw puzzle of the schedule, the way they all allow it to come together. Just real fortunate in that respect. But just to give an example, this week, Friday night, I worked the Knicks-Clippers game in L.A., took a red-eye home, slept for a couple hours, was in Philly yesterday for the Flyers-Devils, off to Utah tomorrow. So just a typical week.
Yeah.
No, listen, Kenny, you bring so much passion to what you do. You can feel it, you can hear it. I'm happy to hear that you don't have any plans to retire anytime soon.
No plans to retire.
No,
Right.
no.
My wife and I are planning a couple of trips upcoming, but no
Okay.
plans to retire, for
That's
sure.
good to hear. Huge fan of your work, and I really appreciate you coming by Club 30. Look forward to working together for the playoffs here, TNT. And we'll probably be on location for the finals.
Well, that'll be great. We had a fun time at the David Blaine show.
That's right.
Out in Las Vegas with Biz and the whole gang a couple of years ago.
Oh, boy. Right.
No, such a great crew with TNT. Love when you guys are there during the playoffs. We'll see which cities we're in during the finals. But thanks so much for having me on.
Kenny, this has been great.
Huge fan of Club 30. It was an honor covering basically your entire career. I mean, Dave and I talk about it all the time. We got to work so many extra playoff games because of you that we are in debt forever, in that regard. But just an honor watching your entire career now as one of your colleagues with TNT and MSG. And Jay, great to finally meet.
Yeah, great to finally meet you too, brother.
And thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. That was great. Really nice to chat.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thanks, guys.
Big thanks to Kenny Albert taking the time. I know he's jumping on a flight. Was it tomorrow morning, probably?
Utah.
Going to the West Coast.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, it's funny. We have, I think, followed each other on social media, just ran like back and forth, and he's such a nice guy. But I always feel like, or have felt like, I've known him for years because of his voice, And
I think you're not alone in that. It's kind of like with Sam and with Kenny too. You grow up, watch sports. You feel like you know the person. You definitely know the voice.
Yeah. Highlights of that episode? I know what mine are for you.
I was impressed with the prep work.
Yeah.
The writing. When you show that.
The chart.
Yeah, for football. And the fact that he keeps all these. He had my stats for my first shutout game, breaking the record. It's almost like I might need that, Kenny.
I know. We definitely
for my vault.
We definitely need to scan it in. It would look great on your wall. I thought that was really, really cool and pretty special that he had saved and like spent time prepping for this, which is just a hang. Like he brought in a file folder of 15 of your games. Really
I'm not surprised though, because when you're that good, especially in that profession, it's all about prep. You need to be organized. And we touched on it during the show. You can't just show up and talk about the game. And you really need to know the players. You need to be prepared.
Yeah.
And he brought it up. Like, for example, when you do football, you come from hockey, then you do a football game. You're talking to fans that follow that team.
Right, so you have to be smarter
so much
than them.
passion. They know so much about that team. So then you need to study to catch up, right?
Yeah.
But that surprised me how much work you actually went into a football game.
Yeah, that was great. I love the kind of the banter behind like no plan B. Kind of where kind of like timing meets and luck meet opportunity. It was just it's fascinating to me to sit back and listen to these stories, whether it's Kenny or our other guests of like. It's like these singular things. Their passion has been so amazing, and they've doubled down on that passion, and then learned how to execute behind it. To make a really successful career is really cool.
Yeah, so his dad Marv, obviously a legend within announcing, but the fact that Kenny, he knew at age 5 already. That he wanted to do this, but I told him this, that like the passion he brings to the booth, and as he describes certain events, it really makes it watching or listening. It makes that moment even better.
Yeah,
and that's what sets them apart. When you talk about Kenny or Sam, It's important because we watch to be entertained, but we watch as a fan as well. And if they can enhance that,
it's true. They do a great job at managing our energy. Like the really great ones, like his dad, Marv or Kenny, like they build you up. They somehow, even though they're calling plays and technically reacting, they have a way of managing our energy and keeping it there in our focus. It's wild. If you want to compare and contrast, like go on YouTube and listen to a college or high school commentator who's just getting going. You can see the gulf of experience difference between what a pro looks like and what somebody who's just getting going in the business is.
I didn't realize he's done it for that long.
Yeah.
Well, that's why he's that good.
Well, another great one in the books. That was really enjoyable.
It really was.
I hope you guys at home enjoyed it as well. If you like what you heard or seen, give us a follow. You can find us wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube and Spotify. We'll see you next week at Club 30.
See you next week, guys.